Welcome to part 2 of the Creality High Combo Beginner series. In the previous video, we covered the unboxing and assembly of this 3D printer. Now in part 2, we will focus on printing using just a single filament. This video will cover how to load the filament, how to download and install the Creality Print 6 slicer software, an overview of the software such as basic print settings, and printing your first model and where to get more models online. For even more information, you should check out the Creality Wiki resource, which has tons of useful information, and there will be a link to it in the description of the video. So by this point, you should have the printer fully assembled and ready to go, so let's get right into it. Before we continue, I just want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, which is PCBWay. With their direct help, this channel is able to keep growing. If you're unaware of what PCBWay do, they offer a range of services for the maker hobby. Things like CNC, PCBs, 3D printing, laser cutting, sheet metal, pretty much anything you need to make your next project, they can help with. Their website is super easy to use. You can upload your project and get an instant quote. And the benefit is you don't need to go into mass production. You can just make the project that you want at an affordable price. And best of all, right now, they are celebrating their 11th anniversary. This is a great opportunity for you to go onto their site and grab the best deals and test out their services for yourself. Simply sign up for an account and then go to this page, link in the description, click to enter, and then scrolling down on the site, you can find all the coupons available, and there's a whole range here. There's also special offers for CNC machining, 3D printers, sheet metal, injection molding. If you go down to instant quote, you can upload your project and get some instant pricing for your next project. So again, thank you to PCBWay for being such a strong supporter of this channel, and let's continue with the video. So the first step is going to be to take your filament out of the packaging, removing the vacuum sealed bag from the packaging and cutting it open and taking the filament out of the vacuum packed bag. And it should look something like this. And also the newer Creality filament should have an RFID tag on the spool. I'll show you how to use this tag later on for automatic filament loading on the Creality High. Because we are using a single filament in this case, we are going to use the top spool holder, put the filament spool on the holder, and then feed the filament from the underside of the roll into the filament tube. Then on the control screen, you'll want to go to the settings and the material and hit the extrude. You'll then see that it goes through a few steps of heating up the nozzle and feeding the filament. So once it starts to feed the filament, you want to try to feed the filament through the tube until you feel it can grab onto the filament and it will start extruding. It'll extrude for maybe 30 seconds or so, and then it will purge any old filament in case there's been a color change, and then it should be ready to print. You might need to edit the type of material you just loaded, so you can go to the edit, and from here you can change things such as the brand of material, the type of material, and of course the color. So apply the settings for the filament you just loaded, push OK, and then push OK in the top right corner to confirm. Now to remove a filament, we hit the extract button. And I'm going to do this because I want to show you how to use the RFID tag for automatic filament loading. When you push extrude, it'll start going through the steps again of heating up the nozzle and a few other steps. It's at this point you want to push on the side cutter of the hot end and the top cutter of the hot end. After pushing those two levers, you want to grab the end of the filament and start pulling it out. Once you can feel it pull out, just keep pulling it out and roll it back onto the spool. As I said before, if the spool has one of these RFID tags and you have a printer like a recent Creality High, it has an RFID tag reader on the side. All you need to do is put the reader and the tag close together and you should hear an audible beep. And if you look at the settings of your material, you'll see it automatically update with the details of the spool that you just registered. You still need to go through the loading process, so push the extrude button and repeat the steps of loading your filament back in. Once the filament is loaded, we can then move on to how to print using the slicer. Getting into the software side of things, or how to print with your Creality High Combo 3D printer, you're going to need some slicer software. In this case, I'm going to recommend the Creality Print 6 software. The slicer software is what's taking the model that we import into it, and it is breaking it down into a layer by layer print which is why it's called slicing, and it converts that information into a file which is called a G-code file. And don't worry, you don't have to learn how to code or anything. It does this automatically. All the G-code is just the name of that file, and it contains a set of instructions for the 3D printer on how to print that object. We need to get the Creality Print 6.1 software. To download it, you'll want to go to the crealitycloud.com website, which is Creality's 3D repository website. So on the main page, you'll see a lot of 3D models. I'll show these off in a minute. First, we want to go to the top banner where it says downloads, and we'll go to software. And you can also see we have firmware, and we also have the cloud app as well for the phone, but we want software. So you click on that. You have a few different things here because obviously Creality have a lot of different 3D printers and 3D scanners and laser cutters. In this case, we need the Creality Print. And you also need to make sure that you're downloading the correct software for your operating system. So in my case, I'm on Windows 11, so I'm going to download the Windows version, but there are also Mac and Linux versions as well. The top one should show you the latest release, and you can also check by the date here. So this current release, the 6.1.2.2458 release, was released in May 30th. So pretty recent actually. So we're going to just click on that. That's going to go into our downloads or wherever your downloads reside on your computer. So just let that download, and then we'll go through the installation step. Now in my Windows Explorer, I have the download of the Creality Print installation software. So you'll double click on it. It's pretty straightforward, just go through the prompts. So we can just start that. It'll say welcome, we go next. You can agree to the terms of service, select a location that you want to install to. In my case, I'll just happy with the default, and we're going to create a shortcut as well. Go next. And then that will just go through the installation process, and we'll just wait for that to finish and then continue from there. Okay, the installation is done, so you should see this window. And in this case, we're going to say we want to run the Creality Print software, and we'll just finish, and that will then start up. Once the software is launched, you should see something like this. And what you're looking at is just a print bed of a 3D printer. It could be anything at the moment because we most likely haven't set it up for our printer or connected it yet. So it's just going to be probably a default print bed, but that's what you're looking at. And this is where you're going to do all your settings. So on the side here, you'll have a panel. This will control all your layer heights, your infills, and we'll get into all the details of what those things are pretty soon. But that's where all your settings are going to go. Up in the top, you have just a menu, so you can go in here to open and import projects, etc. You can save projects. You can go into your preferences in case there's anything you want to change, like units to imperial instead of metric, or zoom controls, anything like that. So you might want to go through the preferences and just set anything that you prefer. There's an undo and redo function up the top here as well, in case you delete something and need to bring it back. This panel here is going to control your printer profiles. There's a whole bunch of tools here that you may want to go through and play around with. And then finally up the top is the three main panels, which is prepare, preview, and device. So generally you move through these three tabs when you're setting up for a print. So your prepare is where you bring in the model, you set up all the different parameters and settings that you need for the print. Preview is where you'll slice, so it generates the G code. It will give you kind of a preview, obviously, of what the model is going to technically look like, layer by layer, and you can, hopefully detect any issues and go back and fix them up and then slice again if you need to. And then device is going to be where you kind of end up at the last step where you actually send the print, and you can monitor the device, monitor the print. If the printer has a camera, you can look at the camera and see the print remotely in most cases, or you can also select different devices as well. So we'll go into each of these tabs as we move through this setup process. One other main thing, of course, is how to navigate in the software. So using your mouse, you'll see the pointer on the screen. Left clicking, you can click objects or use a window to select multiple objects. Zooming in and out is controlled with the scroll wheel on the mouse. Holding down the right mouse button, you can move around the build plate, so you can rotate around objects and see all different size. To pan around, you hold down the middle mouse button and you can kind of grab the plate and move it to where you need to as well. Also in the top here, you'll see a 3D cube representation of what you're looking at. So as you're moving around, you can sort of see what your orientation is in the 3D space compared to that view cube. And also clicking on different areas of the cube will change your view. So if you want a direct front view, you can click on that and just get a straight front view. You can go from an angle or from a top, you can do all that, or you can just go back to the home view as well. Now, one other thing that I should mention, if you do not see this settings panel on the side here, or if you want to hide it, you can click on this little arrow here, which is just going to move it to the side. By default, it should show. In case it doesn't, you'll probably see a little arrow on the side and you can click on that and that'll bring it out. Or if you want to hide it, you can click on that and have it hidden. One last thing on this default view is the two buttons down the bottom here. So you have slice plate and send print. So slicing is what we'll click on to generate the G-code, and that will move to the preview screen. And send print is obviously when you want to send the 3D print for 3D printing. And there's also some additional options when you click on the arrow for each of these buttons. So you'll say slice plate or slice all if you have multiple plates, because you can have projects set up where you have multiple build plates. It doesn't mean your printer has multiple build plates, it just means your project has. So it's just kind of a bit more of a project management and more advanced thing. So we won't really get into that. It's just so you know it's there. And of course the send print button also has some additional options as well, which we'll look at once we get to the actual printing stage. One thing we need to do before we move on to the actual importing model and 3D printing it is, of course, we need to connect to the printer in our Slicer software so that they can generate the correct G-code and talk to each other. We do this by going to the device tab at the top, so you can click on that. At the moment, and especially if it's a default view, you should have nothing there. Now, you need to make sure your printer is on and also that it is already connected to the Wi-Fi network. If that's the case, then you should be able to click on the Scan Add button, and that's going to scan the network and see if it can connect to any devices. And in my case, you can see that it has detected the Creality High 3D printer, so I can click on that and then go to Add. It will also have some information like its IP address, etc. And we can add that. You can sort of see it's added it to the background there, so we can close that. And we can now see some information for this printer. So we can see it is our current device. You can detect more printers and add more printers than just the one of them, and you can manage all of them. So you can have a default or current device selected here. It's going to give you some additional details like its IP address, its status, so whether it's printing, it's currently idle, so it's just sitting there not doing anything. Otherwise, it would be saying something like printing, and it would show you a print file. It will give you some information about the filament status and all sorts of things. If you want further information, you can click on details, and that will take you to a page showing you a lot more in-depth details for the printer itself. So in this case, it has an onboard camera, so we can see the live feed going on here. It's got some information about what it's doing currently, which is obviously idle. It's just sitting there. And you can also do some control here as well. So you can home the hot end, and you can control the light through here as well. You can turn the fans on, you can move it around. You can also see things like a print history. And of course, one of the more important things over this side is what filament is loaded. So we can see it's got the red filament that we loaded in just previously. So that's all detected, and we can control that, either feed or retracting it as well. And it'll give us some nozzle temperatures. So this is a good page to monitor your 3D printer and see if there's anything you need to do. You can even look at previous files that you've printed and right click on them and just export or start printing them straight away as well, which is really cool. To go back to the main page, we can just click on the prepare, and that's going to take us back to our main build plate. And what we're going to do is show you how to get our first model, import it, and start printing it. Moving into the next section of this video, where I'm going to explain where you can find 3D models and how to then import those models into the Creality print software so that you can slice them and of course 3D print them. For 3D models, I'm going to recommend something that we've already looked at the start of this video, which is Creality's marketplace for 3D models. And this is a great place and a great resource for pretty much anything Creality related. So 3D models, and like we showed before, downloads, software, etc. like that. But the point from this part of the video is, of course, 3D models. On the main page, you're going to be looking at something like this. And up the top, you will have your main menu. You can go to the Explore section, and here you're going to find lots of things such as categories for different type of 3D models that you can download and print. There's also other things like quick links for competitions and maker tools and popular searches. So Explore is going to be probably the first place you check out. Collections is another interesting one, and you can go through some of these ones. There's practical storage solutions, and this is going to be changing all the time. You can make your own collections and make them public so other people can check them out as well, or you can make them private and just make your own collections that no one else can see. So this is a great resource to look for particular things. Continuing on, we have contests. So Creality hosts a lot of contests. If you're a designer in some way, I recommend checking this out because it's an opportunity to design something for the world that people can download and print, but also potentially you might win the competition and get some rewards. And another part here is search. So you can search for things for 3D models before you go out and try and design something, or if you have no design skills at all, it's likely someone's designed and made something if you're thinking about it. So I recommend always going to Creality Cloud, doing a search, because you'll probably find something that someone's already created and you can just print it out and you have it. So let's put that to the test. Now, one 3D print that is common throughout the whole 3D printing hobby space is something called the Benchy. This little boat model that's been used as kind of like a 3D printer test. It's usually the first print that people do when they get a 3D printer. I think we should probably download a Benchy and print it out as our first print, because that's kind of what everyone does when they get their printer. So since we don't have it on the printer, we can do a search for it. I'm sure it's here. We're just going to type in Benchy, and here you go. When you do a search, you're going to find a lot of stuff that people have designed, and I think the basic one is probably the test boat. Click on this test boat. I think that's the default Benchy available. And when you go to a 3D model, you're going to see something like this. So here you'll have some images of the print itself or the 3D model. You'll have some information down here. Usually there's a bit more. You have files available in different formats, so different layers and infills, etc. You can also check out the comments if there's any problems. People have probably commented on the model and offering advice on how to fix any problems. You have print settings. So these are different settings people have tried out and they've modified it in some way, maybe to reduce the amount of filament used or speed up the print or whatever it is. People can make their own profiles and then upload that so that other people can download those profiles. And you can see how many people have downloaded these individual profiles. So maybe this one with 86 is probably the most common one. If we go back up to the top, we can either cloud slice this, so you can slice through the website and then send it to the printer. But in our case, we're just going to want to download the model so that we can do it ourselves, basically. So when you download packages, you can just drop on this download package, download files. We can click on that. It will then download it to wherever your downloads go to. So then go into your Windows Explorer or whatever you do to find your files. It usually downloads as a zip format, so I need to right click on that and extract it. And so I'll have a new folder here. If I go into that, we can see my Benchy SDL is just here. The most common file type for 3D models is an SDL. You can also have other file types like OBJs or 3MFs, but typically it will be an SDL that you download. So now that we have it downloaded, we need to jump into Creality Print so that we can slice it and then print it out. So launch Creality Print and then we can move into the next step. Okay, we should have Creality Print open. Now I'm going to just do a few checks before we get started. So we need to make sure our device is connected. So I'm going to check in the device tab, and yes, I can see my Creality High combo is connected and it is currently offline. And if you find that's the case, then you might need to scan it again on your network. It may have changed the IP address since I've turned it off and back on. So we're just going to go to scan add and have a quick search for any devices. And we can see it is here. It has actually changed IP address. So we're going to click on that and add it and then close that tab. And this one that is offline is no longer here. So I'm going to right click and remove device and set this as current device. So if you find your printer isn't connecting, it's probably because of that. You might have turned it off and then back on and the IP address has changed. You just need to re-add it. We'll go back to the prepare tab and we're going to import our model. So there's a few ways you can do this. You can either drag and drop the model in from an Explorer window into the slicer. You can go to File and then Import, and you can click on the Import section, or you can just use a shortcut like Control-I for import, and that's go to the location of your STL that you've downloaded, click on it and open. And there we go. There is our little benchy. So that's our model in. Now we need to slice it, but before we slice it, we need to set up some of the settings so that it prints correctly. Now the first thing you'll want to do is make sure that our correct printer is selected. So we can see our current device is Creality High, so that's fine. This section will be our different system presets. So you can see I've got a few different printer presets here, like a K1 and an End at 3. In my case, we'll make sure our Creality High is selected. And you'll need to make sure the bed type is correct. Mine is the textured PEI plate. That's the default plate that it comes with the Creality High. Moving on to the right side, we need to create some settings here. And I'm not going to go through every possible setting in the slicer for printing because that would take forever. And you're not going to have to go through every setting. There's only really a few key settings that you really need to change. Those things primarily being your layer height, your infill, and your supports. So the first one is our layer height. And if you click on this part, you can drop it down. You'll see these different millimeters. So 0.12, 16, 2, 24, 28. As you're probably aware, when a 3D printer is printing, it's printing in layers. And these layers or their height is controlled in this section. The main thing you need to understand is that the smaller a layer height is, the more quality you're going to get in that print, but the longer it's going to take to print. And the larger the layer height is, the less quality you're going to get, but the faster it's going to print. The default layer height that most people use is either a 0.2 or a 0.24. That's kind of your mid-range. If you want a little bit more quality to squeeze out, go a 0.2. If you want a little bit more speed, probably go 0.24. Now, in our case, because the Benchy is quite a small model and it's got a little bit of contrasting edges and shapes involved, I think a 0.2 is going to suit this model. And I can show you the difference if we slice this as well. So ignoring all the other settings, if we just set the layer height and we go to slice plate, this will then move to the preview tab and we'll see some of the details of what the print's going to do. So we can see that the printing time is 40 minutes and it uses this much filament. Now, if we change that to 0.24 and we slice the plate, we can now see that's dropped down to 36 minutes. So you can see with changing the layer height, it's actually sped it up. So it depends on your requirements and you'll learn this over time. But in our case, we want to try and show off what the printer can do. 40 minutes isn't too bad. We've got time. Now, the second main thing we need to consider with our slicer settings is infill. And infill is the pattern and the density of what's inside your model when it's printing. Because when it's doing an outside wall, it's just a solid extrusion. But when it moves to the inside, it doesn't need to be completely filled because that's just wasting time and material. So what 3D printers will do is typically just create a bit of a mesh pattern inside just so it supports itself and doesn't collapse and has a little bit of an integral strength, but it doesn't need to make it 100% full of material. And that's what infill is. Now, if we go to this side here, we have different settings for things like our quality, our strength, our speed, our support, our multi-filaments, and others. And if you can't see a lot of these settings, just make sure the advanced parameters is turned on as well. So quality is basically our layer height and line widths and all that kind of stuff, controlling settings that show the quality of the print. We're looking for infill, which is under the strength tab. So if we click on strength, We have things like wall loops. Wall loops is a good one if you want something that's quite strong. I recommend bumping the wall loops up to 3 or 4 instead of increasing your infill. Wall loops typically can have a more of a factor towards strength when you need that in a print. So you could put that to 3 or 4 if you need something really strong, but it does increase the time quite a bit. Typically, default will just be 2 wall loops. We can ignore all the other stuff. We're looking for infill, sparse infill density. And if you're not sure what a setting is, just hold your mouse over it and it's going to give you a bit of a brief description. And if you click on it, it's going to go directly to the wiki where you can read a whole bunch of information just on that thing as well. I recommend over time, explore these settings, read about them, learn more and more. That's what 3D printing is about. It's constantly a learning experience. So we're looking at the infill density. So that is going to be controlling how much of the material is filling the internal of the model. So it's set to 15%. Typically that is a default setting, and we're not going to change that. And also grid, if you click on that, you're going to have all these different type of infills. And this is a whole other area that can have its own video basically, but different infill patterns are going to control things like how strong they are, how quick they print, how easily they print. There's a whole different subject here that I'm not going to go into. By default in the 3D printing community, most people will just go 15% and grid for 99% of your models. If you need a bit more strength, you might need to bump this up to 25%, or if you're not too fussed about strength, you could put that down to 10% because you're not making a strong thing and you just want to increase the print time. So you could do that by changing that setting. But we're just going to leave it at the default for this case as well, and we're just going to say 15 and grid. And the final thing that we need to control when we're setting up a print is probably supports. Now, supports are used to basically support a model in the air so that the 3D printer can print on something that isn't touching the build plate surface. In the case for the Benchy, we don't need to use supports because it's been designed in a way that it just doesn't need them. But I will do another model that I've designed myself for my hydroponic garden that does require supports, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. It might not make sense now, but just stick around for the next model and I'll show you where supports are actually used. So just to recap, for our Benchy, we're just going to do a 0.2 layer height. We're going to use the default infill of 15% and cross pattern, and there is going to be no supports. So with those settings, we're going to go to slice plate, give it a moment to create the G-code. You can check it out, the settings for particularly the print time and the material, because 1, you want to know how long it's going to take to print, and 2, how much filament you're going to use. And the important factor here is filament weight, because typically you're going to get a filament in a roll, which is a kilo. So 1,000 grams per roll. And in this case, it's only going to use 11 grams of material. Now, if this Benchy was really, really big and it was going to use 1.1 kilos of material, well, then we got to consider being around so that we can swap that empty roll out for another roll so that it can continue printing. So whenever you slice, just check those things. Check the print time and check how much material it's going to use. Then if you're happy with that, we can go to send print. And this window is always cutting off a little bit on the bottom on my computer. I'm not sure if it's the same for yours, but you can just drag this down a bit so that you can see the full window. Things you want to check here is, of course, what printer is it's connected to, and you can see that it's connected to my Creality High. It's currently idle. One thing that we do want to do, and I recommend you always do this, is a print calibration. So that's just going to do a few things before it starts printing to ensure that you're going to get the best results once it does start printing. So put print calibration on. We can also check that the material is correct, and in this case it is detecting the right material. And then we have 2 options here. So we can start the print, which is going to send it, upload it to the printer and start printing, or we can send only, which is just going to send this file to the printer and not print it. And we can go over to the printer and then actually manually print it when we want to. In this case, we just want to start the print. So we can click on start print. It's going to make sure there are no models. So it's just saying, make sure there's nothing on the printer, because when it starts printing, if there's anything on there, it may collide and cause a crash and damage your printer. So make sure it is clear before you go OK. And then you can hit OK. It will upload the file. It will do its thing. And then you end up on this screen here. So the printer is now, I can hear it's firing up, it's starting to warm up and get started. And from here is how we can monitor the print. So while it's doing its thing, I'll cover this quickly. As you can see, we're now in the device tab as if we had gone to the more info for the printer. And here, of course, we can control things like the light. We can see the printing time. And once this starts printing, we'll see more details on how much print time is remaining. You can pause the print if you want to, or stop it completely and cancel it. The control, I wouldn't worry about anything like changing this to fast or ultra fast. Just leave it default, that's fine. The only thing you might want to change here is turning the light on and off if you really had to. Of course, you can also see our printing history. And down here you can see some details of just the printer getting ready to print. So the nozzle is heating up, the bed itself is heating up, and all that's left to do now is basically just wait for it to finish printing. So I'll jump to some footage of this printing and the finished results, and then we'll come back to another model where I'll show you some of the support settings. Once you send the print to the 3D printer, it'll take a little while to start functioning. It'll start to do things like heating up the heat bed and the hot end. Also, because we set to do a print calibration on the start, it will purge a small line around the corner of the build plate and also do some other things like bed leveling. And before long, it should start printing down the first layer. Obviously, 3D printing can take a little bit of time because the model needs to be printed out layer by layer. You won't need to do much while it's printing, just simply check on it occasionally to make sure there's been no problems. But if everything is fine, then eventually the print will complete and the model will be ready to be removed. Now the Creality High does come with a flexible build plate, so you can simply lift this up and give it a slight bend in different corners so that the print releases from the bed. And here's the finished result of our first print, the Benchy. And you can see the quality is really good. So let's move on to the next print. As I was saying, one last thing I want to show you is the final setting, which you should always consider, is supports. And like I said before, we don't need to use it on this Benchy. It's kind of designed to not need supports. But I do have a model that I designed for my hydroponic garden system that does need support. So we're going to import that. And it's a good opportunity to show you can delete models from your build plate as well. So you can just click on any objects you have and then hit the delete key, and that's going to remove it from the build plate. And now we can import our new one. So Control I, and it's called our Hooch Spike. But the important thing, if we look at this model, is the underside here is going to need supports, because when the printer is printing to this area, it can't just print in thin air. It needs something under it, or at least work into it through an angle or shape so that it can print that surface. But a flat surface in the middle of the air like this, it's not going to be able to print. So for this case, there's some settings we need to change. It doesn't need high quality. I'm not concerned with quality, so we can bump that up to a 0.24, so it's going to print a little faster. The infill, we go to our strength tab. I'm not too concerned about the infill, so I'm going to drop this down to 10%. This will again increase the printing time just a little bit. Our infill pattern of grid is fine. I'm not too concerned about that. But the other thing is support. So we go to our support tab and we need to tick on the enable support, and this will enable our support settings. Now, a lot of this you don't need to worry about, but there are a few that you'll need to change. So there are basically two types of support that are pretty well used in the 3D printing space. And if we drop that down, we have either normal or tree. You don't need to worry about the manual options. That's a more advanced thing where you can paint surfaces where you want the supports to be. The only two that you need to focus on is auto for normal or tree. So let me show you what the two different types of supports are. So we're going to put it to normal and we're going to slice this. Give it a moment. And as you can see, it's printed a lot of material on these undersides. And if you go up here, you can control the layer height for, this is in the preview tab. So we can kind of see the process of how this is 3D printing. So you can see what it's doing here is it's kind of just laying down the minimum material just to build up the height. And while it's also printing the actual model on that layer as well. And it's printing up until it gets to about here. So then it's going to create a bit of a surface height, and we can actually step through the layers by pushing up and down on the keyboard as well. So we can see here it's getting here and it skips a bit of a layer and then it starts printing the actual model again. So this kind of air gap is what allows the supports to release from the model, but it just gives it enough of something underneath to print on. Once it gets that new layer down, it will start printing again. And it should do the same thing again on this outer edge. So if we keep going up, okay, just here we can see again, it's sort of laying down a base layer and then it starts printing the next model bit. And then from there on, it doesn't need any more support. So it just continues up until the top. So that's our normal supports. Now there's another type of support called tree. So if we click on that and we go auto and we slice, and you're going to see these supports are completely different. So you can see here, it's actually kind of printing these little branches. So it starts off quite large and then it moves up and it starts branching off and creating all these branches. And then when it gets to where it needs to, it will print down that interface layer and then continue the model. So why would you use normal? Why would you use tree? Typically, the consensus is that normal is great for when you have a large flat surface that you need to print. And tree is really good for when you have organic models. So if you're printing a figurine or if it has contour, curving surfaces that the normal straight up and down normal supports isn't going to really accommodate for. Tree is great because it can kind of start from the side and then work its way up into those crevices. These days, everyone's pushing towards tree supports. For almost 90% of cases, you're going to use tree now. In this case though, the important thing for me is both printing time and material. So if we look here, we can see our print time is about 2 hours and our material is about almost 40 grams. Now, if we change that back to normal and we slice it, our print time is a little bit quicker in this case, so 1 hour 55, but our material is now 50 grams. So that's an extra 10 grams of material. And if I was printing a whole bunch of these, that material cost is going to add up pretty quickly just for supports that are going to be thrown away anyway. And the time difference is only 5 minutes, so it's not a huge deal for me. So really, tree is the best option for me. And you also have some sub-styles for this as well. So when you go into normal, you have different sub-styles, grid and snug. Default is like we saw the first time. Grid is going to give you a bit of a different pattern, and snug is going to really tighten it up as much as you can. So I might actually show you that quickly. So if we go to normal and then snug, you could see before it was quite large. Now this time it's really pushed itself under just those surfaces. So it's really tried to snug it up nice and close. And it's actually dropped the time and the filament down a bit as well. Now, if we go to tree, we have a few options in here as well. So tree slim, tree strong, tree hybrid, and organic. And like always, we can just either hover on this and have a quick read of the different settings, or you can click on that and actually see examples and more in-depth details. Typically, I'll go a tree slim. It might offer some suggestions like zero interface layers, etc. Do you want to change this? So we can just say yes, and then we can slice this. And you can see now it's slimmed it up a little bit. It's using a little bit less filament, not much to really worry about, but the printing time's reduced quite a bit as well. It's now on par with the normal. So we're going to go ahead and print this now, so I can show you the process of actually removing supports as well. So again, we're happy with all our settings now. We've got our layer height, we've got our infill, and in this case, we need supports as well. So we're happy with that. Drag that down. We can see our printer is ready to go, and we can go start print. It's going to ask us, make sure there's nothing on the build surface. We know there isn't, and we can send that model off. So we're going to leave that to print, give it a couple of hours. And what I might do is, because I don't actually need this model complete, I just want to demonstrate the supports being printed. So I'll let it print up until the support layer, and then I'll show you how to cancel the print, and we'll just leave it there, and then I can show you how to actually remove the supports. So we'll be back as soon as that's done. Here we can see I've cancelled the print, so it's just finishing at this point, as I don't need to really print the rest of it to demonstrate the support feature. But you can see the supports have been printing up, and they're supporting underneath these faces so that the rest of the model can print. Now it's finished. I recommend also getting a pair of small pliers or something so we can pull these supports off. Otherwise, to remove your print, let it cool down first, and then you should be able to just pop the build plate off like this. A tip for helping the build plate cool quicker is to put it on a nice cool surface like the table next to it or something, as that will soak the heat from the build plate into the surface and it will cool it down quicker. You want to only remove prints when the plate has cooled down, preferably to room temperature, because it will not damage the surface of the build plate that way. And it will be easier to remove as well. Otherwise, you can see it's quite secure on there at the moment, but these are flexible build plates. So what you normally do is you just bend it, give it a bend in the other direction, and then it should just pop off like that. You can then put the build plate back on, and it's magnetic, so simply line it up with the back points here and then drop. And then just check that the sides are aligned and the back is aligned, and it'll be ready to go for the next time. So if we get a nice close look here, you can see all the supports just touching the bottom here and the supports on this side. So we're going to start removing these. And you should just be able to pull it away with your hands. But if it is a little bit too hard, like I said, you can just use some pliers and just get in here and just give it a bit of a twist and a pull back and forward. Work your way around, just breaking off the bits as you go. So you can see here a good chunk has come off. So eventually you'll start getting to some points where it just wants to release and the whole thing will just eventually pop off together. And there you go, that's all the supports removed. And one of the downsides to using supports is you end up generally with a rougher surface where the supports are. I recommend just playing around with settings and looking online for tips and tricks for how to minimize any of the surface scarring that you get with supports, and over time you'll learn better techniques. These are just default settings, so it can definitely be improved from here. But if it's just a functional print and not needing high cosmetic details, then really I could still use this in my hydroponic setup. So in part 3, we're going to be looking at how to connect the CFS system and start doing multicolor printing with this printer. If you have found value in this video, and I hope you have, then please consider subscribing to the channel so that you'll be notified when part 3 of this series is released. Thanks for watching.